Welcome to Seeking Alpha's CEO Interviews. Quality of leadership is a decisive factor in stock performance, so we provide in-depth interviews with the best and brightest CEOs in the public markets. We publish limited excerpts from our interviews on social media platforms and the full interviews at seekingalpha.com and in the highly rated Seeking Alpha mobile app. To find the full interviews, open seekingalpha.com or the Seeking Alpha mobile app and search for the phrase CEO Interviews, or simply type a stock ticker into the search box.
Welcome to CEO Interviews today. Joining me is Timothy Coe. He's the CEO of Entheon Biomedical. Entheon's a biotech research and development company committed to developing and commercializing a portfolio of safe and effective dimethyltryptamine-based psychedelic therapeutic compounds, DMT products, for the purposes of treating addiction and substance abuse disorders. Entheon intends to generate revenue through the sale of its DMT products to physicians, clinics, and licensed psychiatrists in the US, throughout the EU, and throughout Canada. Investors can find Entheon on the CSE, the OTC, and the Frankfurt Exchange. Timothy, welcome to CEO Interviews, and it's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Excellent. And I have a bunch of questions for you. There's a lot of places we could start. I know you guys have a lot going on, but kind of like as a DMT expert in a way, I think for our viewers, it would be great to understand kind of maybe the historical research associated with DMT, maybe a little bit before we get into Entheon and kind of where research in the past has kind of been with DMT and what we know.
Absolutely. Prior to any formal research being done, South American traditions for centuries, if not millennia, have used DMT in the form of ayahuasca for the treatment of, it's what we might characterize in sort of the Western world as things like depression, obsession, addiction, or just a general, lack of existential direction. We have a very, the Western context, we put things into these very defined boxes, but within a more traditional medicine system, these might be considered diseases of despair or spiritual sicknesses that ayahuasca is actually really good in treating. It's very incorporated into certain traditions, sort of medicine systems. So that has been in place for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But DMT was actually researched as early as the 1950s. It's understanding how it's the synthesis of it and how it binds to a variety of receptors. And then over the course of, during the 60s and 70s, there was a bit of an expansion in terms of the research into psychedelics. And then inevitably, there was the prohibition that came from the maybe overly reflexive response to the sort of cultural happenings of the 60s and 70s. But more recently, in the last 2 decades, there has been an additional interest in DMT. The work of Rick Strassman has been pretty influential. And then more recently, Imperial College of London, where some of our scientific advisors reside, I've also been looking into DMT and have found some really interesting things in terms of DMT's ability to induce a very crucial state of entropy. And entropy is potentially foundational in terms of treating some of these very pathological conditions as it relates to depression and for us, a primary focus of addiction. And so we're very excited to be at this new forefront or this resurgent sort of edge of psychedelic research with DMT.
Excellent. And thank you so much for just kind of going through that. And it's so funny you mentioned that, because I've been listening to some old Terence McKenna videos, and he actually mentioned that Western culture is a little bit more rigid and black and white in how they see things, whereas other cultures, they have better, things aren't as black and white. There's more nuance, and they're able to kind of, psychedelic assisted therapies tend to help with that and kind of vetting those out.
Absolutely.
In terms of Entheon's genesis and kind of, why you chose DMT as the molecule focus, if you could maybe get into that, that would be great.
Yeah, totally. So not to get too into the personal, but I lost my brother to drug addiction in March of 2019. And that was after, 2 decades of him struggling with addiction related issues. Over the course of that time, there were nearly a dozen stays in residential treatment, every known sort of psychoactive agent from antidepressants, anxiolytics, antipsychotics, methadone, Suboxone. All of these things were tried in tandem with things like psychotherapy and countless hours in a psychiatrist's office. And so eventually, when we lost my brother to addiction, it became quite apparent that some of the most of the conventional approaches to treating, and they were all tried, prove ineffective in treating a very specific type of drug user. And the reality is that often, those that suffer from addiction do qualify by virtue of ineffective treatment as being treatment resistant, and that is the case more often than not. And so, following my brother's death, we made it our mission to first validate if psychedelics could be, have potential in treating drug addiction. And pretty rapidly, we amassed a core of scientific advisors such as Matthew Johnson, Robin Card-Harris, Dennis McKenna, and Christopher Timmerman and Malin Utog, to name but a few, to validate the idea that, hey, are psychedelics a possible treatment for addiction? And pretty resoundingly, the answer was yes. But then understanding that the patient populations that are to be treated with these drugs are often going through a variety of trauma-related issues. The difficulty came down to this understanding that with the traditional longer form psychedelics like ayahuasca, psilocybin, and LSD, the time of engagement is actually quite intensive. It's anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. As the individual as the experience usually generates some pretty profound, introspective, and sometimes inherently challenging unlocking of partitioned areas of that experience, the notion of having someone be locked into this very intense experience for the course of 6 to 8 hours becomes a little daunting. And from a commercial rollout perspective, is maybe a bit difficult to conceive of. So, we were balancing and weighing all of the potential treatment types, but ultimately arrived on DMT just due to the fact that in the event of a negative adverse reaction or a negative adverse event, DMT is potentially the only molecule that provides you that ability to titrate the dosage or to end that experience in the event that it becomes overly distressing, overly challenging, as may be the case. So DMT has a very short sort of window of experience, anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes, and it is metabolized very rapidly by the human body. So from a commercial scaling perspective, rather than having a physician and a sort of mental health professional overseeing the entire duration of a 6 to 8 hour experience, during which point if someone has a distressing or challenging experience, you have to administer a sedative or an anxiolytic or try to talk that person down. DMT provides the opportunity to create these shorter and no less powerful sessions, anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, during which time a person says, hey, it's becoming medically necessary that I stop. We have the ability to stop that experience and have a person return to a functional baseline in anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes due to the natural metabolic, the metabolism of DMT. So from a safety perspective, DMT certainly has that differentiating quality. But from a therapeutic and program design perspective too, it allows us to create shorter sessions after which that very important step of integration can take place. So rather than having these long sessions and saying after, hey, what did that experience mean to you? And expecting the individual to, remember, distill, and characterize 6 to 8 hours of really intense experience, we have the ability to modularly and progressively, therapeutically work on a person, in small modules, as opposed to saying, fingers crossed, let's hope this 8 hours is good for you.
Right. And is that kind of tie into dose response? Is that in line with and I think you mentioned titration and the ability to maybe dilute out the molecule a little bit so its effects aren't in dialing the dose response. Is that what that means?
Yeah. Absolutely. The dose response is DMT has very unique pharmacokinetics, meaning that it clears very quickly, and the onset is actually quite quick too. So the common means of administering it are generally smoking it, and the experience onset is very steep and sometimes challenging due to the pace of the sort of onset of effects. The way that we're going about it is with a continuous intravenous infusion. So, with some of the longer form psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, the onset could take anywhere from, 30, 40 to 60 minutes long. With DMT, we can actually economize the time needed within the session by bringing up the experience not so abruptly that it becomes challenging, but not so long that the individual, is in this sort of limbo state of coming onto effect. We can bring that experience on gradually, but efficiently, keep that person within that sort of specified dose range that is a sub breakthrough dose range, but in our estimation, equivalent to what a large dose of psilocybin would be. And then, once we keep them in that experience for anywhere from 30, 60 minutes, titrate the experience down so that they sort of naturally come back down to earth.
Right. Okay. And I can see why that's hugely beneficial for a lot of reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And kind of getting into the organization, right? I understand you guys is it in process? Their clinical trials are in process now, or are they beginning Q4 of this year? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And I think it's in partnership with the Center for Human Drug Research in the Netherlands.
You got it.
Okay, great. And just talking that and kind of working through, is this like in a clinical setting there through like intravenous? It's like titrated out through an IV, or are they smoking it in the clinic, or is it not like an ayahuasca experience? It's through IV. Is that kind of
it's
okay.
Intravenous? Yeah, it is intravenous, and we're measuring a variety of dose levels. It's primarily a safety trial, but we're also measuring a variety of dose levels, as well as looking at beyond pharmacokinetics, but also pharmacodynamic responses, generating a lot of additional data that is, crucial. We've talked a lot about DMT and why that's beneficial and maybe more customizable and safe. But it is generating a host of additional data that we're then funneling into a biomarker program that is supported by EEG technology. And I'm really excited to talk about that.
Absolutely. And I was going to kind of segue into that. Was this Halugen and how that play in basically the testing kits and the genetic testing kits that play into that as well? As a subsidiary of Entheon?
Yeah, Halogen represents one of the pillars of our personalization strategy, but the EEG stuff is related to Divergence Neurotech. Divergence Neurotech is a amazing group of AI and machine learning whiz kids. And so they are in the process of developing a host of biomarkers that are specific to the DMT experience. And those are really influential in terms of defining for the physician these measures of the experience that will ultimately dictate whether it's a bit of a decision support system to ensure that the physician is aware of where the person is during this often very complex and difficult to communicate state. So pulling it away from the world of subjectivity and actually having reliable real-time measures of states of immersion, as well as indicators of whether that person is in that therapeutically defined space, we believe is going to be a very crucial component of psychedelic therapies going forward, as so much of the experience is often poets, and it's eluded poets and philosophers for decades, if not centuries, how to best characterize what an individual is going through. It's very important to develop a system that will give physicians insights as to, hey, is this person in a safe place? And then is that person, beyond just being in that safe place, in a therapeutically useful place? And as we talked about the ability for us to titrate and modulate the dose of DMT based on that real-time measure, there may be opportunity for us to really tune into where is most effective for an individual receiving care.
Okay, so it's almost like using their biomarkers as predictive indicators in a way. Is that a good way to think of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Because certain individuals can be more prone to certain maybe panic or as an anxiety event, and you can basically see that through the Halogen process and technology.
Yeah, no, so what I mentioned was on the divergence side, but halogen is a very important biomarker. It is indicative of some very important biomarkers. So as you mentioned, Halogen is a company, a subsidiary of ours that we acquired in early of this year. What they've developed is a direct consumer genetic test that is now available not only in Canada, but the US. And we've had some recent announcements about partnerships as well. So what Halogen covers is it looks at a variety of biomarkers, genetic biomarkers that are indicative of specific mental health risk factors for schizophrenia and psychosis, as well as looking at various metabolic features that might indicate whether a person is a slow responder or a fast responder to various psychedelic drugs. Right now focused on the world of ketamine as well as serotonergic psychedelics. And so what the test is intended to do is for anyone that's interested in taking part in psychedelic therapies, those psychedelics are very low in terms of risk factors and risk of abuse. There are some specific areas of caution that we feel are very important for an individual to be aware of, as we're aware that certain psychedelics may be linked to certain schizophrenic type of onset. The genetic test does give a risk report as to, based on the genetic biomarkers, how likely someone is to develop some of these mental health conditions, as well as, if a person is taking that very brave step of saying, I want to treat my depression, we believe that it's very useful for them to understand whether they possess the metabolic factors that will render a ketamine experience potentially riskier or less risky than something like a psilocybin experience. And so, yeah, the direct-to-consumer kit is intended for that. And we're really excited by some of the announcements and partnerships that we've made and have coming down the pipeline.
Fantastic. And thank you for, you guys have so many, it seems like there's so many interlinking technologies that come to the forefront. It's not just that we're working on developing a novel DMT product. There's could be brain imaging technologies, all types of genetic testing, all types of other products and technologies that are kind of in the ecosystem of this research, which I think is really cool. And it's on your website detailed very nicely, all the partnerships that you have. Which I think is great. And just to what you alluded to before, it's more of a color commentary question. I find a lot of people in like researching psychedelics, it's not enough to just say, hey, let go of the control and let the process take over. That's all well and good before you go into the experience, right? And then you're in the experience, and it's so I can't stress enough how important these seem to be as part of a product, as a company, as an actual institute, an organization. So thank you for detailing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's very important, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of excitement about psychedelics. So it's like, oh, this psychedelic will, create world peace. There's a lot between, what psychedelics can do and what they actually do. And so for us, it was very important for us to develop a integrated, personalized medicine system that, not only on the molecule level does allow for more customizability and safety in terms of the actual experience, but in terms of the assessment and diagnosis phase of things too, in a way that's agnostic of DMT. We realize that as the psychedelic industry evolves, there are a variety of already existing molecules as well as new molecules to come online over the course of the next many years. Ultimately, we have a duty of care to those individuals that are brave enough to receive care for what ails them. And so we're developing tools, an integrated system of medicine that's agnostic of DMT, though we find that as we presume that is the ideal psychedelic molecule. For those based on a variety of metabolic risk factors as well as genetic risk factors, and from the perspective of individualized brain imaging, there is a need for a very personalized form of assessment as well as therapeutic program design that we're designing our tools to help cover. And so, we're really excited to be, in our estimation, one of the only integrated personalized medicine companies within the psychedelic industry.
Absolutely, and agreed. And kind of segueing into that, I think there was we mentioned the CHDR a little bit. I think they just received license amendments allowing the clinical trials or the use of DMT in clinical trials. Could you talk about some of the specifics around the clinical trials?
Yeah, it is a phase 1/2A trial, so primarily a safety trial. So it's a single ascending dose, placebo-controlled, double-blinded trial. It's a bit of a mouthful. it is for a continuous infusion of dimethyltryptamine in healthy normals. But one of the benefits of that distinction is that even within this classification of healthy normals, there is the ability to include for those people that smoke. And so that is one of the indications that we're pursuing. Smoking takes nearly over approximately 500,000 lives a year in the US. So it's a massive, massive unmet need. So, though this is primarily a, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic type of study, we are also looking for a quit smoking signal to potentially come out of this. And following the, successful, hopefully positive results of the clinical trial, the safety trial, we are actively formulating our ideas about what subsequent trial designs might look like. Obviously, we are very much interested, as it is a very topical and relevant sort of indication, opiate use disorder and alcohol use disorder. There are a variety of potentially other behavioral addictions that sort of are premised on the same sort of route of pathology that these more traditional sort of drug addiction models operate on. But for now, safety trial for Q1 of this year next, and then following successful results of those trials, looking to expand into opiate use disorder indications as well as alcoholism.
Okay, great. And I like what you mentioned too. It's so we'd have to do a separate show just to kind of delve into like what success looks like for the patient from a neural pathway perspective and how their mind is changed, it's rudimentary, quote unquote here, but how their thought processes are changed to not want to have that addiction. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
And kind of just kind of wrapping up, I know you mentioned Lobo. We mentioned Lobo pre-call, and that just happened yesterday. So I know they have a pretty nice distribution network, and they have a manufacturing space, I think around 5,000 or 6,000 square feet, which is impressive. And I would just love if you could detail for our listeners just that partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. So Halogen is focused primarily on the direct consumer market, and the acquisition of Lobo really does bring into the fold that in-house ability to process, sort of do our own analytic work, whereas before Halogen required the services of Lobo Genetics to do that processing. And so by bringing all of that in-house, there are considerable cost savings to Entheon, but it also comes with it a host of very accomplished professionals to expand the scope of our genetics research. Presently, we are in the direct consumer market, and it is in our estimation, of a highly useful test. But some of our intentions around genetics go far deeper than what is presently encapsulated within the Halogen test, and so having that real professional, that group of research professionals in our stable to really lead the charge. We're really aggressively looking to expand our understanding of pharmacogenomics. We're in the process of further recruitment, looking at other key opinion leaders to inform some of our design choices there. And so by bringing Lobo in-house, as you mentioned, there is a 5,000 square foot facility that it has in-house analytic work, as well as that host of very accomplished genetic professionals. And so looking to further leverage that, as personalization and integrated medicine are so, in our estimation, so key to psychedelic therapies. As we mentioned, there's a lot of maybe opacity or mystique around, hey, these molecules are presumably amazing, but in the actual sort of real-term deployment of these things, each individual from a sort of risk factor and metabolic reality perspective is so varied that we really do think genetics is a potential key to unlocking successful therapies for those that need it.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned, it almost takes a village in a way. You have a company, but that's for a lot of support companies that you've either acquired or you have partnerships with that are kind of critical to understanding kind of the compendium of everything you want to do. So I think that's fantastic. And it seems like there's always news coming out, and you guys are excellent about keeping the website updated. And well, Tim, I really appreciate your time. I know you have a lot going on, and hopefully maybe we can reconnect again in the future and maybe post-clinical trials, or just perhaps catch up and see what you guys are going on in the near term.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, I know it's maybe 30 minutes isn't enough time to encapsulate the whole complexity of the story. But yeah, we encourage everyone that is interested in the Entheon story and what we're trying to do to visit our website, sign up to our newsletter. We are constantly working on, whether we talk about it or not, really interesting stuff that we think is super relevant to not only, Entheon's DMT efforts, but to the psychedelic space as it evolves. Ultimately, we're trying to fulfill our duty of care to, the individual that's brave enough to, reach out for help, but also in doing so, trying to service society. So anyone that sort of that resonates with, please, visit us at entheonbiomedical.com, sign up to our newsletter, and we'll try to keep you abreast of all of the very interesting and important work that we're doing.